Hello, welcome to another episode of Unfolding the Soul. Today, my guest is Josh, who was known for a time as the Dream Sailor because we were discussing his dreams on the early days in the Discord. Um, he's been with us since the start, effectively, right, on the Bridges of Meaning Discord and sometimes also on the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord. And today, he's talking to us about the subject belonging. What does that mean?
I think for me, it is about feeling that wherever I am in life, I'm not wanting to keep it so narrow as to meaning belonging to a specific group or anything like that, or even belonging with other people in the moment, but even having a sense and feeling of belonging every day, even alone, just going throughout my life and wanting to feel as if I belong wherever it is I am in that moment.
How do you know whether you belong somewhere or not?
I don't know that I do know or don't know that I think a person can necessarily know it, because it's almost more as if you don't feel it, then it's noticed as it's missing.
Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it's like a pre-requirement to your action in some sense, right? And then the lack is an inhibition.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So do you think you could have like a positive relationship in the sense that you could also notice when it's there?
Possibly. And that's something I've tried to think through it and work on. And I think at times that is there, but it's quite difficult for me to achieve. Mm-hmm. And it comes through in a strange way. I've talked with you in the past, and I've talked a lot, and I've been on the Discord in general. People who have talked to me at some point have probably talked with me or heard me talk about Owen Barfield and his work. And his work has been quite influential for me when it comes to trying to get to that place where that sense of belonging is recognized, actually, and not just recognized when it's missing, but actually recognized when it's there.
Mm-hmm. And I feel that there's a big connection to gratitude. Is that correct?
There is a connection to gratitude. I don't know, I'm not sure how much, but I think that does play a part in it, at least at times anyway. But I don't know if I would want to say that gratitude is so important to that sense of belonging all the time, because there might be times such as a death maybe, or some tragic event where I don't think gratitude would necessarily be important, but still having that sense of belonging is important still.
Mm-hmm. So is the belonging that you're talking about a social belonging there, or is it also an existential belonging?
I think it would be existential as well, but I might have to ask you to kind of frame that word for existential. That's a word I always kind of struggled with, getting a grasp on its meaning and holding on to.
Well, so there's a sense social belonging is like, ooh, for me at least, right? Like I'm not feeling left out in this place, right? Like there's a place for me. Even if it's not in the center, like there's still a place where I participate in the body, right, of what's happening. And then the existential belonging is in some sense your place in what's the word, universe, maybe the plan of God or whatever, right? Like a way where you contextualize yourself towards the higher, and in some sense feel that you're in a relationship that justifies effectively what you're doing. Like I don't have a better way to describe it.
No, that's good enough. Yeah, and laying it out that way, then I would say it's definitely far more existential, the issue that I've tried to deal with, or have had to deal with. Not to say that there isn't an issue of social belonging as well that comes up at times, but it's far more of an existential issue.
And would you say then that feeling is some sense like a measure of how well you fit, right? Like it's a fittedness. Maybe the word I should use is reality, like a fittedness in reality.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the question of fittedness then becomes, well, here I am in reality, but is there something off with it, or something wrong, or this maybe a constant nagging feeling of there being something off about everything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and oftentimes that ends up being sort of, I think I'm kind of thinking out loud, I'm not even sure if this is right, but maybe even a dissonance between fittedness and reality. It's like, it becomes a thing where maybe I start to question, is there something wrong with reality? And then kind of flipping and kind of oscillating back and forth between that and the fittedness of myself aspect. Because when you start questioning, well, is there something wrong with reality? Then in my beliefs, and I think this partly comes from the Christian tradition, it may be other people who subscribe to Christianity wouldn't agree with this, but I think that there's something about questioning reality within the Christian tradition that kind of brings you back to saying, well, it's all something that's created by God. And so if that's the case, then what logically follows is there must be something good to that, at least, even if there's something about the reality that is off, you have to at least acknowledge through the scripture that it's created good. And so there's then that kind of brings the oscillation back to, well, what's going on with my fittedness to reality then, and kind of flip-flopping back and forth with this, questioning both and trying to figure out what if what and where is the wrongness.
Mm-hmm. And like I'm testing a little bit, right? Like if the wrongness is in me, I should be able to do something about it. And when you can't find what you can do about it, then it's like, well, maybe the wrongness is not in me. Is that a?
Yeah, I think that at least at times happens. Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, I want to explore the positive case. So is there, when you're looking for something in the world, right? Like you kind of have to know that it exists in order for it to be justified, right? So is there a way where you could say, well, yeah, now I do fit, right? Like is there a point where you could reach that conclusion?
I think so. Can you ask more? I'm not quite sure what you're trying to get at.
Well, so when you're looking for something, right, you have to know when you found it, right? Because else you're going to end up looking for something forever, right? And if that's the case, then you're doing something wrong, right? Because then you're not looking for something that can be found.
Meaning you're asking if there have been moments when I felt that this, whatever sense of belonging has been achieved or found. Is that?
Well, yeah, or if you would achieve it, that you know it when you see it.
Mm-hmm. I think it would be a sense of a feeling as if what you were calling this fittedness and reality sort of a dichotomy, or which is maybe even a split that maybe is felt to come together, or fitting into reality are no longer two different things. There's not that dissonance anymore, where it's a sense of, I think maybe going back to how I was trying to define it in the beginning, the sense of knowing. Something I tried to write out at one point, I think I called it a felt knowing, where the knowing of being where you are, the knowing that you belong is felt. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Still an open question whether you recognize that feeling, but yeah, like, no, I get that point, and that brought me up to this is-ought gap, right? So in some sense, you have what is, right, like, which is what is real, right? That's reality, and then what ought to be, right? Like, this is your way of well, expectation, effectively, right? And expectation towards the future, right? Like your vision, but it's also expectation of how things come to you, right? And having those things align, right? Oh yeah, the things that are meeting my expectation, and they allow me to go into the future correctly, right? Like, that's kind of the balance of everybody's life, right? That we need to fix.
Yeah. And so over in the, what's it called, the Bridges of Meaning, I don't know, is it called Bridges of Meaning writer server? I don't even know what it is, but as far as Discord goes, I'm probably more active over there than anywhere else on Discord. And right now we're going through C.S. Lewis's so-called space trilogy, or ransom trilogy, if you will. Anyway, we're on Paralandra now, and there's a scene that's pictured where, how do I say this without giving away too much of the story to anyone that might be interested? There's a person who I would say represents innocence in the sense of a younger being, let's say a younger human who has an adult form but is more childlike. And this person there's a situation where there's a discourse on expectations and disappointment. And there's something about this younger creature that is able to move past what I would feel as extreme disappointment, and would launch me into some sort of depression. But this creature is able to simply say, oh, well, I didn't experience what I thought was happening, that I was mistaken. And so my soul moved on from that. My soul shifted to whatever was in front of me, and I was able to take all the good in it at that moment without dwelling on the past or dwelling on what might possibly come in the future. And I think there's something about that, to where I feel the need, I would like to be able to say that we all, especially in the Western world, need to be able to rediscover that. But just to speak more for myself, I feel like there's a deep need to be able to rediscover that kind of innocence, not the innocence and naivety, but in a sort of that ability to be able to let the soul goes. Let the soul, how do I want to say it? Let the soul go where it should be in the moment, to be able to find that belonging. I was listening to something from Ralph Waldo Emerson, I think just this morning, actually. I was waking up. I didn't want to get out of bed, so I was listening to this essay. I can't remember the name of it. it might have been called something on spiritual laws, maybe from Emerson, but he was talking some, I remember, about the human being being maybe more like a pipe, like a tobacco pipe, and it's like smooth and hollow is the proper working pipe. So meaning that the human being is almost more of a channel, like channeling something. And I think there's something to that. And possibly maybe it's a learning what spirit to channel or to accept. I don't know if it was a bit of a mouthful there.
No, that completely connects, because I just had a Bible study around forgiveness, right? And I think forgiveness is maybe that which replaces innocence or whatever, right? Like, or naivete in some sense, right? Because when you're naive, you don't recognize things for what they are, right? So you just, I guess, have some distraction take you away from the evil, right? Or you might even be blind to, right? But when you see the snake, right, you need to deal with the snake. You can't just let it drop, right? And you can resent the snake in the sense that, okay, now there's this big problem, right? And this big problem is going to require something of you, right? And you can get reciprocally narrowed on the relationship to the problem, or you can forgive it, right? Which is an acknowledgement of the thing, but then having a constructive participation in whatever means you can, right? Like, even if that means that you run away, right? You don't run away out of fear, but you run away out of, okay, this is the best that can happen. So does that framing make sense to you?
I think so.
And so I think what the channeling is, right, is maybe the not getting caught in the reciprocally narrowing, right? So in some sense, the forgiveness is allowing you to give it a place in the story, right? And because it has a place, it doesn't require more than that, right? And I think in some sense that's what naming the animals is, right? Like, it's giving them a place, and the place allows you to have right relationship. And as long as you don't have that, right, you end up with a dissonance between you and the world.
That sounds right. I'm not quite sure what to say in response, but it sounds right.
I'll just keep going. So yeah, so this belonging, where did that first turn up in your life?
I think it was an issue that I first noticed when I would say, I think it was the first grade. So going into first grade, I was placed in a class. When my mom found out who my teacher was, she knew who the teacher was and did not want me in that class, and decided to have me replaced in a different first grade class. And that took a few days. I was maybe, I don't know, 3 days or so in this other class until I was replaced. And when I went to this other class, I remember sitting in this carpeted area in the corner of the room where there was some shelves with books, and this is where the class would gather for reading time. Sit down, cross your legs on the carpet. And I remember being in this place in the room and talking to one of these other students, another boy in the class, and I don't even remember how this came up even, but I remember his response to me at something, and I don't even know what I said to him to elicit this response. But he said, the rest of us started in this class all together a few days ago, and you just came in here all of a sudden, and basically telling me that I needed to accept that there was going to be more effort on my part or more time required or something for there to be a full belonging, or even the possibility, maybe even was in the back of my mind without me being conscious of it, that maybe I would never fully belong in this class with the rest of these other first graders because of this 3-day lapse and joining the class. So I think that's probably my earliest conscious notice that I had of some sort of lack of belonging.
Is that something that reverberated then in the background throughout that year?
I don't know if it did then, but it was something that was a recurring thing, specifically with school, because I changed schools a few times. The next time was a few years later, going into middle school. My parents decided to send me to a private Christian school, and that was quite small. And that was quite a shock. And this may sound goofy, but I'm pretty sure it happened to coincide with all of a sudden having allergies to what you might call a hay fever, I guess, but having allergy to pollens, it happened to coincide right around the exact same time. And I don't know if it had anything to do with it or not. Like I said, maybe some people would think that sounds funny, but I can't help but think that there was something related there going on.
Yeah, a stress reaction, but it's also a double dose, right? Like it's piling on.
Yeah. And then I did, so then I went to that school for middle school, which 4 years, and basically told my parents I'm not going back there again, not going back there next year. So they found a different private Christian school that was, again, a weird sense of not belonging, because I had joined this very small high school of, I don't know exactly how many students, maybe 15 students in my grade, if that. So could have been even a couple less. I don't remember for sure. So the entire 9th grade, let's just say, is 15 students, but these were kids that had mostly grown up together. Even if they hadn't always gone to the school, they had at least known each other for far longer than I had known any of them. And so then there was another clear sense of lack of belonging, or a felt sense anyway, whether it was correct for me to take it that way or not. But I guess that's kind of part of the whole notion at hand, or the whole question at hand, feeling that wherever the situation is that I'm in, that there's a sense of belonging. But anyway, a very clear sense of not belonging felt.
Mm-hmm. Was it also a problem with the culture that was there? Like were you able to acclimate to the new culture, or?
No, I was not. In fact, I developed a bit of an identity in rejecting the, how would you say, the accepted or normal culture in this place, that it kind of became a part of me to push back against having some sort of cultural identity that I was not 100% willing to accept, being able to clearly say no, and what I say, learn to dissent, maybe that's a way you could say it.
So what was the thing in the culture that you were not willing to accept? Was it the culture as such, or were there aspects that you disagreed with?
Yeah, I'd say it was more about particular aspects. And so this is kind of a funny thing that came about to me. It's funny to me looking back on it now. And I had fun with it at the time too, but it was a school where there was a strict dress code policy. And so you had to wear a belt every day. You had to wear particular khaki pants and certain polo shirt that your parents had to buy for you. And you had to wear these every day. You had to your shirt tucked in. And the way I'm built, one thing that would happen is every time I sat down in class, my shirt would come untucked and back. And so it became a thing where in the middle of class, a teacher might say, okay, everybody stand up. We're going to do a belt check and make sure a dress code check, make sure everyone is following all the rules. And inevitably, every time I would stand up in class, my shirt was untucked because I had sat down. It wouldn't matter if I had tucked it in before I sat down for class. So I got these demerits that would pile up, and it got to a point where it's like, well, this is stupid. I'm going to start to do stuff on purpose now to disregard the dress code policy and do other things. Like if there was a teacher that I didn't like, I would find things to do to disrupt in a way that would maybe be more along the lines of civil disobedience, like simply not doing assignments, or I don't know, or sometimes even other things, such as I remember being given a demerit one time, and as soon as the teacher handed it to me, I just crumpled it up and threw it in the trash in front of her and walked out of class. And the principal came after me when I was leaving school to question me on it. And I remember talking to him, and he said, you know, it seems, Josh, like you just don't have any respect for this teacher. I said, yeah, I think you got that exactly right. And he had nothing else to say. And then I went home. So there would be things like that I kind of felt like I was forced to learn in a way, looking back on it now. Maybe at the time, maybe I thought I was doing these things, but maybe it was more of the pressures and a combination of my pressures and character that all came together to develop that.
So how did doing that affect your social standing? Was that something that was frowned upon?
By who?
By your peers?
My peers, I would say there was a sense of, this is my felt sense of it, my interpretation. I don't know if this would be correct or not, but my sense was that it was something they didn't know how to handle. That we don't know if this is whether to approve or disapprove of this. Well, it's kind of funny, and we also don't like these stupid rules, so we're glad that this person's doing this, but there wasn't necessarily something to where they said, hey, I really want to be your friend because of this, you know, thing you did, this dissident activity that you're displaying. It wasn't something that drew people in the way of any sort of close friendship. Well, maybe I should take that back. Maybe it did for a couple people. In fact, while I'm sitting in my garage, I don't know if it comes up in the background here, but actually one of the friends I gained from that situation where I was in that school actually just helped me come and help me drywall my garage and got it all painted and everything. And I've been doing some work for him lately, even though I haven't talked to him for years, like 15 years, maybe, pretty much since a couple of years after high school, but kind of picked that relationship back up.
Mm-hmm. So you feel like this inability to process of your peers was in some sense the thing that ostracized you or something, like because they couldn't keep up?
Or again, yeah, maybe it was my interpretation of the whole thing. Was it something, me looking back on it now, could I have accepted that as my place where I belong? Could I accept that as being a good place to be, regardless of all the stupidity of rules and difficulties related to the whatever social anxiety I might have felt? I'm part of not feeling like I knew people. That could I take that all and say, yeah, this is part of who I am? What was your question exactly?
Well, whether you felt like there was this chasm because they couldn't keep up in some sense, right? Like they weren't where you were at in life or in your relationship with school.
Well, yeah, there was a felt chasm, but my sense is they were all over there and I'm by myself on the other side and I don't know how to get across.
Mhm. But that was a wish you had.
More of a feeling, I think, more of a need even that I didn't want to acknowledge, I think, because this would have been, let's see, the second time that I had switched schools in my life. And I was, I think, starting to develop an attitude that I can do it all on my own, or I can be some sort of lone wolf, or I can be just this individual that's out on some vast ocean just on a raft all by myself, and that I can hack it, even though the truth is it's probably not realistic for anyone. But I was developing this attitude that said I can do that.
So yeah, like if I put it to my experience in life, it's like you get cast a role, or you think you're cast a role, and at a certain point you just take it, right? You're like, okay, I guess I am this person, and I'm gonna live my life this way.
Sort of, but I guess my question is, was I taking the wrong part of the role I was being given? If this is the role I was being given, am I accepting something that's not actually part of the role? Like that loneliness, was I trying to take loneliness as my role? And I think I did, rather than recognizing maybe being a conscientious dissenter is maybe more properly what I should have been seeing myself as. I don't know. That's kind of speculative, but I think that's probably at least more right than what I actually did do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a sense of getting the role, and then there's a sense of accepting it, but there's also a sense of realizing what that role is over time, right? And then you can either do that more, right? Like you can do that with collective sense making in some sense, right? Or you can do that alone. And when you start doing that alone, right, we talked about reciprocally narrowing, right? You narrow into your own conception, and then it's really a lot harder to get out.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so do you think the size of the group mattered?
Yes. So the final change I had going through the kindergarten through 12th grade space when I switched for the last time was, I think it was in the middle of 11th grade. So in the middle of my junior year, switched going back to the public school I'd gone to for elementary, for kindergarten through 4th grade. So I finished high school back where I started, in that same public school. And so there were more people. It was much bigger than this little tiny class of only 15 or less of my grade. There's instead well over 100. And there was a weird sense of kind of not wanting to be known almost at that point, because it's like, well, I've been so many years beyond elementary school and I'm different now, but there's all these things I can remember about myself when I was younger that I would kind of like to forget. I would like other people to forget about these things now that I think about it, and once I go back. So there was this strange sense of feeling more at home, feeling like there's more of a sense of belonging, but also kind of saying, well, maybe it would be better if this were just another entirely new situation again, for a third time around or a fourth time around. What was your question again initially?
Whether the size matter?
Yeah, so yeah, I think it does matter in that it is easier for an individual to find someone else that helps them get that sense of belonging just by a more of a numbers game, more of a math probability thing, I think is, or what it is. But also there might be something in the sense that reminds me of Jordan Peterson talking about the some experiment with animals that was done where they figured out that the zebras that end up being marked with red are singled out by the lions to be eaten because they're easier to spot. And there could be some of that going on too, or maybe it's easier to blend in when there's numbers. It's almost the opposite of having that individual identity come to the surface, where you can feel as if you've, I don't know, blended in with the crowd or melted into the crowd, become a part of the crowd rather than have your individuality sticking up and it being something that can be pointed out and criticized.
Mm-hmm. So how's blending in helping with belonging? Because blending in doesn't seem like belonging, but it seems like hiding from something.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So what are you hiding from?
You mean what was I hiding from then, or at that time? I don't know. I don't know if I really knew then, or if I could even say now. Maybe it was even just a sense of relief or a bit of a reprieve, more in that kind of fading into the crowd, and so that it wasn't something where because before with such a small number of people, I think I often felt as if I was in the spotlight in a certain way, even though I wasn't really seeking that out. And so it could have just been a feeling of rest or a relief from being in the center of things at times, where I could, if I wanted to, just never be in the spotlight.
Yeah, because I had the word spotlight in my head as well. I was going to give it to you, but you gave it to me first. And I like this idea of the spotlight, and in a sense, it's the involuntary fronting of you in relation to the others, and maybe, right, like if we're talking about a role, right, like at that point you're required to enact a role in some sense, right, because you're seen. and maybe the fact that the sense of being seen was removed or something, and the pressure associated.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so is there a positive case for belonging that also appeared around that time? And yeah, like did you
Well,
go ahead?
well, I think I always had a positive sense of belonging when it comes to family. And so I think I did always have some sort of rooting in that area, in that zone of family, that part of life that it maybe more or less felt as if I could rely on that or fall back on it.
So what was different there?
Well, be more specific. Different in what way?
Well, was it that you had a preconceived role in the family that you just could slip into, and there wasn't a pressure, or was there like an acceptance of your person that was missing outside?
But there's definitely always pressure. So that was there. So I can't say that was a difference. And in fact, if anything, there was maybe even more pressure when it comes to family.
Same pressure or different?
A different kind of pressure. But maybe in some ways the same. I guess I've always had a pressure put on me to be successful and achieve. But I don't know if that's really important as far as in this context of what we're talking about. So I'm not sure exactly what would have given me that sense. Perhaps it was a sort of stability, and that there were more or less the same people there. Because I guess going back, that was something that I mentioned a few times, that there was this change of the people. Yeah. So I've had change of scenery before. How old was I? Maybe second grade or so. My parents built a new house that we moved into, and I don't remember feeling any sort of lack of stability there, or some sort of shift that felt as if there was a lack of belonging. Well,
How well do you deal with change in general? Is that a thing that is hard?
I think it depends on what it is. So some things not well at all, and some things I'm able to pretty easily take in stride. But I don't know if I've ever really tried to identify or separate into any categories which things I have a harder time with.
Yeah, so we're at the end of high school. Is that a major shift?
I don't know if that was really, it was definitely a change in that I was far more able to pick where I was going to be myself after that point, because before, where I was going to be was far more dictated by my parents and their desires and choices were. Not to say that I had no say in it at all, but I had little say beforehand. And it became something where I now had much more say over where I was going to be. So maybe that was a point where I had to kind of shift into trying to find for myself where I thought I belonged. And I think that's probably still continuing today in certain ways. Maybe in some ways I kind of figured it out as far as more the physical space where I belong. I now live, and I expect I'll probably live where I am now, unless there were some really massive change in my life or in my surroundings in some way. But I now live where my grandfather lived, my grandparents, and then my uncle. I live where my dad and his siblings grew up. It's a property that's been in the family for decades. I'm not even sure exactly how long. Probably for 60 years or so. So what was I saying? The physical space, I feel like there's the belongingness is all taken care of, but there's still this nagging issue of belonging in reality, wherever reality is, whatever reality I find myself in, is a struggle to know and like I said, feel that knowing.
Yeah, so to pick on the physical space, right? So do you feel like the relationship between the physical space that you're in and reality is something that's been foregrounded to you?
That has been what to me?
Present, like that you remarked that. So example, are you paying a lot of attention when you make decisions, how the environment looks like? And
Yeah, there is that, but I've always had that anyway, because I've always been fairly conscious of the physical space around me. So yeah, that is the case, but I don't know. What are you trying to get
well,
at with that?
like I'm trying to get at the relationship between the physical space and the way that you perceive whether you belong or not. Like how's that relationship?
So the physical space, so I might at times be able to connect it with specific memories, because I can look out my window and I can see hills where I know I used to play as a child when I came and visited or stayed with my grandmother. And I can see the property, I can see the landscape in the way that it used to be, because it's changed quite a bit over the years just because of how it's been managed. And so where there maybe was thick brushy woods that you couldn't hardly walk through before is maybe now an open area where it still has trees, but it's maybe you would say more cultivated. There are a lot of these things there that are all over. There are specific memories that I can pull up. I can picture the space as it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So there is that. And I'm not sure though that I would say in those moments that I could feel that sense of belonging when it comes to the space, but those aren't necessarily the thoughts. Those memories aren't the thoughts that I live in all the time. I have a different frame of mind that probably most of my waking day that I'm in, and that still has all its own difficulties, like I was saying, with finding that sense of belonging.
So to go back to the high school part, so you're getting more agency in the decision making, right? So I kind of was looking for a connection between the physical space and your decision making, but it seems to me that that wasn't really there in the sense of, oh, like I want to go to this place because, like, I don't know, like they have these cool bars that I can go to, or right, like was something like that happening, or like this amazing college that like has this culture or whatever?
Well, no, I would say that what did happen is I stopped doing things, stopped going to things, and stopped participating in things when I now had the control over it. For example, going to church. I stopped going to church for I don't know how many years, probably not too long. A couple years maybe. Let's see,
So
were there other things I'm trying to, I'll go ahead.
so you were isolating yourself in some sense. So what did you replace that with?
There was an attempt to, from what I saw, gain more what I thought were normal, like high school to college age relationships. So I was 19. I moved out of my parents' house. I got an apartment with a guy I was sort of friends with, kind of knew from work. And we got an apartment together. We did a bunch of partying, did some stupid stuff, didn't really get along with them all that well. then moved back home and bought my own house. So there was an attempt to replace it with, like what I said was what I thought was a more normal kind of late teenager, early 20s kind of relationship that I would say now is actually quite immature, but I thought that I needed to go through some sort of stage in life that I had felt that I was denied.
Okay. So were you specifically trying to enact something in doing that, or?
Maybe, well, act in there maybe as a key part of that, and act, and that maybe I was trying to act as if I was a young college age person and act out what I thought a young college age person is supposed to act out.
Was there also a sense of forcing yourself into things that you actually disagreed with?
Somewhat. I think that's why it was so short-lived. I think is because I probably had that perception, or more, it was probably more intuitive, that just it's like, nah, this wasn't the right way to go. So hence moving back in with my parents, and then going from there to find my own place and decide that really, rather than act out what I thought was this normal college age lifestyle, I went from that to being the only 21-year-old that I knew that owned their own house. So there was quite a flip there in a way.
What were you looking for in the house ownership? Like, is it still independence?
To some degree, there might have been that thing from way back earlier. I said this idea of being able to go it alone. And it wasn't that I did do that alone, but there was far more of a sense of loneliness that did go with that, because I knew that at 21 years old, I was working third shift full time, and during the day trying to get some sleep, work on my house, and take some college classes. So instead of doing the thing where I could go take my college classes and then just go party or do whatever, go hang out and goof off, I was acting in a way kind of contrary to, like what I said, what I thought was what a college age person is supposed to act like. And then, yeah, was there some embrace of something that was from earlier? I think so, but it was, I think, maybe a matured sense of that loneliness, that lack of belonging, and that I could now accept it better, in the sense that maybe better is too generic of a word. I could accept it in that more matured way of, now it's not just I'm going to act as if I'm supposed to have this loneliness because it's thrust upon me, and there's all these circumstances that are outside of my control. It was now more, okay, here is where I've chosen to be, and there is a loneliness that goes with it. And now, though, I can look at and say that I've chosen this over the other options. And if loneliness happens to go with it, it might have its difficulties, but I can learn to be okay with that as far as the physical loneliness aspect.
And how does the going back to church, what made you do that?
That's probably a whole story in and of itself that I don't know if I'll get into, but more or less the short of it being that I decided that wanting to goof off like a young 20-something college student was not really what I wanted to do. And that's maybe there was something I'm kind of struggling with how to give you this really in a shortened version and
Well,
use
I
the
get the sense that you were looking
but,
for a redemption.
yeah, yes, yeah, that's fair to say. Yeah.
So redemption of your life through church, redemption of your life through acceptance of responsibility, like there's, and in some sense, cloistering yourself in the.
Oh, well, so here's something, if I can articulate it, that brought me back to church was earlier talked about this split between reality and fitting in, this fittedness. I think it was a very harsh coming up against reality that ultimately brought me back to church, to say that I needed to learn how to fit with reality, and the church was better able than anything else that I had experienced going away from the church. The church had more to offer and helping me learn to fit in with reality.
Okay. So seems like it's a building stage of your life. You're trying to lay the foundation. So do you feel like you managed to do that?
Yeah. Maybe the foundation is there and there's still no house yet. Still trying to figure out the rest of it. So maybe I could say we got the foundation of the church, and now after that, I don't know. There's maybe a little bit of work that's been done.
So what happens after the foundation? Like why didn't there appear a church?
Why didn't what?
Why didn't the church appear? Like what's the detour that you're on that you don't proceed?
Well, I guess that's still the question that's being worked on right now, is that I don't know exactly where there's the disconnect, or where.
Well, what happened? You're working on this
happened?
foundation, right? Like
So,
that's like a phase or something, right? So that kind of has to end at a certain point. Maybe you can recall when it ended.
well, so I started going back to church, and let's see, how long did it take? That would have been in my early 20s, and then it was maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. I met my wife and got married. So we were 26. We're pretty close in age. We're only a few months apart. So 26, got married. We were married for, I think, around 3 years before we started to have kids. And then I guess maybe that's where, if you're looking for the change over time, talking about the shifts, that was probably, obviously getting married was a big deal. And having children, though, was, I think that's when it really started to run up against this maybe even more serious issue of feeling of belonging and not feeling it. That I ended up being the one to stay home with our kids. And I had a
hold on a second, right? Like
okay.
I want to get to the marriage first, right? Because like I think
Okay.
the marriage is also something that's supposed to give you a belonging, right? Like it gives you a place, it gives you a way to be useful outside of yourself. So is that a thing that you experienced?
Well, yes. Oh, I got a cat on the table here. There, you say hi. What was I just gonna say? So, what did you use? Usefulness outside of myself?
Yeah,
Is that?
like I think that's a means of finding belonging, right? When you're appreciated for what you bring.
Yeah. So part of my experience, as far as that goes, was was, I was going to say pressure, but I don't know if I would call it just a pressure. It was something more than that. Because I felt something kind of coming up within that drove me to try to achieve more without having that kind of pressure that comes from without, that says, well, you know, when I would, let's say, get a bad grade on some school assignment because I blew it off because I didn't feel like doing it, and I might have teachers or parents or family saying, hey, you could do a lot better than this, why are you being so lazy, and, you know, disregarding your work that you need to do. And not that kind of pressure, but almost more something from within coming up and driving me to try to achieve more. So there was that.
Do you feel that that is a sense of belonging somewhat?
Sort of, but that had its own difficulties though. So for example, some of what happened was that I would try and do things that I hadn't done before, like take on risks that I might not have been willing to take before. Not that it was actually really risky behavior, but that it was maybe considered risky. Well, I could just tell you quickly. Like one example would be quitting my job and then going and getting a builder's license. And so when I did that, my wife was kind of put off or startled and kind of afraid with that situation, which is something that ended up working out pretty well. But there is a tension there between that, like what I was saying, this sort of thing kind of coming up from within, and then the outward, or the, you know, it was almost the flip from before. Before I had people saying, well, you could have done a lot better and tried a lot more and you were lazy and you didn't. And now here I was trying to do a lot more, and then somebody saying, well, wait a minute, this seems kind of scary to me, and it's just slow down a little bit.
So does that mess with your sense of belonging? Like, is that like, ooh, I'm overshooting on the other side? Like, is that?
Yeah, I think it does mess with that sense of belonging.
So you feel like there's an affirmation, social affirmation that you need?
Yeah, I think so. I'm a little hesitant to agree to that, but I think that's right. So, maybe again,
Well, now I need to
better.
ask more. Like, where's the hesitation?
Well, I think it goes back to the thing from earlier, this developed sense of being able to do it alone.
Mm-hmm.
And now, and there's a situation where clearly there is some sort of need to have, as you say, affirmation, but that kind of has a sort of, there's this little like twist in my gut that says, no, don't agree that you need anyone else to,
Yeah.
you know, affirm whatever. And it's something that even using that language of affirmation is not something I very willingly use when I'm talking about myself, or really even in general, because so much had that developed identity of myself as, and even kind of maybe to some degree imposing it on other people. That's sort of being able to do things in a more of a lonely way.
So that's not a thing that you got from your family, like.
Oh, there's definitely some influence there. It is very much an attitude of, on both sides of my family, of strong-willedness and ability for the self to achieve without anyone else's confirmation or help.
Was it also in church? Like, is this a?
No, I don't know if that came from church. Well, it maybe came in certain ways. I would say more indirectly. It would have possibly come from like a recognition of certain things. Like I was pretty good at being able to memorize things, so I could memorize a verse or several verses the night before and go spit it out the next day. And so there was kind of this, it's sort of singling out and noticing a skill, but I don't really remember beyond things like that where there would have been any sort of push for an individual to be able to do everything on their own. In fact, there was far more of a community aspect where there were lots of potlucks that would go to, or things where there would be an after church thing going on where maybe the adults, the members of the church, had to discuss some business aspect, and the kids would all kind of just run around and play. And there was a lot of that coming together community thing that was a lot like family, like almost like if there was a bunch of cousins that got together where their parents were doing things and they were off playing.
So was there a lot of interest in your person from there, or like was it more in the sense of, ooh, are you doing your checklist, or was there also a sense of involvement in your personal development?
I'm not sure.
Was it there at all? Like,
well, it would have to be to some degree me trying to think back and kind of guessing, because I might not have had that very, let's say, direct interaction with adults that told me clearly that they were concerned with my personal development. But I would have to say, from in general, their actions, I would assume that they were concerned with that, but there wasn't, like I said, necessarily the clear or explicit communication that care was there.
mm-hmm. Yeah, would you say that the care was there or the concern?
I think the real care was there. Again, like I said, I'm sort of, judging that based off of actions in general, but not words spoken about that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you got this internal drive that's kicked into first gear, and I assume that the children put that at least in second gear.
Well, that's maybe part of my issue that I'm still struggling with now. So my oldest kid is getting close to 8 years old, and yeah, it's almost like second gear is broken for me there. So when kids came along, I had a really hard time adjusting to that. Not because I didn't want kids. In fact, I was the one who told my wife before she was ready to start having kids that I wanted kids. And we had at least had an understanding. I don't really remember talking about having children with her before we were married, but I think there was an understanding between us that we both wanted kids eventually. So when kids came along, and the decision, the agreement between us was I would start staying home to watch the kids, because we were in agreement that we didn't want to just send them off to someone else to watch, that we wanted either one of us or more direct family care of our children. But I did not adjust to doing that well, at least in my frame of mind. Overall, I don't know that I've done a bad job. I don't think I would say that. I think I've probably done a decent job of watching over my kids and raising them. But that frame of mind and that sense of feeling that I was in the right place with what I was doing is not something that ever came when it comes to that aspect of my life. And in fact, that's even something now where I don't know what's going to be the case. We just had our fourth kid about, was it less than 2 months ago. And now we're talking about changing who does what, how things work, because I didn't adjust to that.
So what do you mean by adjusting? Like, do you have a sense of?
When I say adjust, I mean achieving that sense of belonging and then being able to then act properly in reciprocation to that.
Mhm. So can you be more specific about what you feel is missing?
It might, well, I'm not really sure actually. And so that's part of the struggle. I don't know, but I have some vague notions. I have maybe sometimes a vague sense of, it probably becomes a lot more apparent to me when there's a reaction, like when somebody asks me, what do you do? Maybe I'm meeting another person for the first time, and I don't know, I have maybe a different sense of this when depending on the gender of the person, whether it's a man or a woman, but there's oftentimes on my part a felt sense of something being off, or maybe being a little embarrassed to say, well, I've stayed home with the kids and this and that, and I feel like I want to avoid that question a lot of the time. What do you do? Because even though even though I had a say in what I would do, I don't like giving that answer. It's something where again, maybe I'm in some ways looking at everyone else around me and saying, well, I see this is how a family is normally structured, and this is how people within the family typically act, and I'm not following that. I'm kind of this off over here person that doesn't fit the mold again, and I struggle with that.
Mhm. But it's not that you struggle with the execution. It's more that you struggle with.
Well, there is a feedback kind of in that we're in that feeling of not being very normal in that particular aspect of my life, that then that kind of feeds back into feeling almost immobilized at times, or kind of frozen up, and then having a really difficult time getting myself to do anything. Sometimes sometimes it can be a very deep depression that kind of sets in.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm still looking at the point of frustration, like, because is the point of frustration that you can't imagine yourself in your current role, or is you don't want to
I,
accept it, or like where
I,
is it?
well, I'm not sure, but there's probably part of it, again, to use that language that I don't like to use, talking about affirming. And then because sometimes even then when there is actually affirming language that people use, I kind of feel, it actually almost makes me feel worse sometimes.
Mhm.
Because, for example, maybe I think particularly women, but even sometimes men will like, oh, well, good for you. You get to do this and that. And that you get to stay home with your kids. And a lot of times I don't feel good about that. I would rather that just not even be said for some reason. That it feels,
Because you don't agree, or like where's the
because
frustration again?
maybe I feel like there's, I think, other things out there that I'm not acting out, that I'm not being I don't know, just that they're not even necessarily things that I really care about a lot, but I almost feel as if I should care about them. For example, something as simple as going out and working a regular day job to bring home a steady paycheck.
Mhm.
I do things I do outside of the house to some extent here and there. And there's a lot of things that if I sit down and logically think about it, I do a lot of valuable stuff. In fact, things that either do bring in some sort of income or save us a lot of money. But I have a really hard time getting past the not going out and doing the thing that I feel as if men are expected to do.
Mhm.
And doing it in the way that other men do it, particularly, I feel is a hard thing to get past and get through.
So do you feel like you have a sense of a calling that you're not fulfilling?
I think there's a little bit of that kind of nagging feeling somewhere, like maybe I should find some sort of career path or some sort of path to follow that singles me out in some way to achieve that notable individuality. I don't know. Is that making sense?
Well, yeah, well, it's making sense. I guess the part that I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around is you keep referencing to I guess some sort of imagined ideal, right?
Mhm.
And
Right.
trying to live up to the imagined ideal, and it's fair, like fair enough, right? But then I don't feel that you connect the ideal back to you, right? Like you don't do the translation. Well, what is that living that ideal mean for me? Uh, do you get the sense that, like, I feel like it's one directional, it's not bi-directional. I don't get the sense of that you have a relationship to it, like.
Well, yeah, I'm not quite sure what you're having a hard time with, but yeah, there is this sort of imagined ideal, and on one hand, I'm rejecting that, and then on the other hand, I'm, I flip the hand over and or flip the coin, and it's the same coin, but I also wish I had that. So I'm sort of torn and sort of split, and that part of me wants to be able to have that imagined ideal, and then the other part says no, I'm going to reject it, and then I have that split that trying to resolve. It's like, okay, well, which is right, which is wrong? Is there, again, or is right where I am? Is that all okay? Should I learn how to accept where I am more and find that satisfying, or should I be going after some imagined ideal? And
Well, I don't think these things are exclusionary, right? Like, I think you should strive for acceptance where you are always, but that doesn't exclude striving for something, right? Um, so yeah, I'm just with the striving, right? Like I feel, I guess I don't see the reason for the striving, right? Like the reason seems to be pressure from your ego, at least so what I got so far in the conversation.
yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Okay. So I guess I'm gonna go back to two things. First, gratitude. Like, do you feel that you can experience gratitude for the things that you have and you're doing and you're allowed to do? Or express is maybe not the word, but receive, or I don't know, like, be in.
Be in gratitude. I don't feel as if I easily can. I would say I think that I should,
Mhm.
but it's not necessarily something that easily comes.
Mhm. So I guess my follow-up question would be, would you be able to do that when you would be striving for this ideal, this imagined ideal? Like, would you be able to receive or be in gratitude around that?
No, I don't think so. And so that's probably partly why I know that I wouldn't be within gratitude if I were pursuing that. So that's why I'm not.
Yeah. So I guess that from my perspective resolves something around that, right? Where it's like, okay, there needs to be a relation to the fruits of the labor that somehow justifies the labor, and and yeah, so maybe we go to the existential nature, right? Like fit this to reality, and I've been thinking a lot um, around like dimensions of relationships that you need to cultivate, right? And that's why I talk about gratitude, right? Because I think that's one dimension of relationship with being that you need to cultivate in order to properly be. And if you don't have the gratitude for what you're doing, then you're missing out upon, right? Like then there's a quality of the relationship that's inaccessible for you, and therefore there's also a limitation in the other aspects, like being skillful or being creative or whatever, right? Because you can't draw out what's in there, right? Because you can't connect it. You cannot, yeah, you can't connect to it in some sense. So how do you feel about that?
I think that's right. It's something that I sometimes feel, but I think it has to be, at least for me, I find I have to cultivate that in a certain way, that gratitude. Now, for me, how that might be is maybe is something that hasn't really come up for me very much lately, but at times I may be able to go through things. Maybe I get a job done. Maybe right now I've been wanting to get a bunch of down trees cut up and split and stacked for firewood, and maybe accomplishing a couple hours of doing that, being able to look at what was done and say something like, thank you, Lord, for the strength and the energy, the ability to have done that. I did it safely. Now it's time to move on to the next thing. And so that is there sometimes. And I think it's helpful to cultivate that when you can, anytime you can feel good about something that's accomplished, that there's something recognized there. And maybe for somebody who's not a believer in God or whatever, find some way to find that gratitude, to actually be able to voice it even in some similar way, I think is helpful. But I don't know. What do you think? Do you think it needs to be cultivated?
Well, I definitely think it needs to be cultivated, right? Like you have to attend to it in order for it to well up, right? To get texture, right? Like, because if your relationship isn't feeling it through, right? Like if it's just a passing by, or like I just say this or whatever, then I don't think you live it, right? Like so it the saying it has to be like a portal into to getting the experience, right? And then if you, well, and I also suffer from that problem. I think everybody has a really hard time with gratitude, right? Like saying thank you is one thing, but feeling thank you is a completely different can of worms, right? And getting into that feeling is yeah, I think that requires humility, right? It requires also to contextualize what you're doing, right? Like how's this participating in the bigger picture, right? Like it's like, yes, right, you're grateful for the strength to do it, right? But like, why are you grateful for it? Well, because you had days when you lay on the couch and you didn't do it, and that felt really bad, right? And having that contrast come up, right, and fully being aware of that, right? Like I think that's really, really hard. Maybe some people have a better natural tendency, and the same goes to accepting compliments or affirmations of other people, right? Because effectively they're putting on a frame. Oh yeah, you could have this relationship to it, and then you're like, yeah, but that's not the way that I think about it, right? You said, well, like when I'm living in my house, I'm not connected to the history of it, right? Like there's only these moments that I'm connected to the history. Well, that means that you're privileging something else, right? And it's how do we privilege, right? And what do we privilege? That is the big question.
Sorry, I'm distracted by something, some critter in the garage. I'm surprised that the cat isn't going after it. She kills stuff all the time.
Right. And then we're privileging the cat and not going after critters.
Yeah. So yeah. Well, and I think that's something that I have learned to do over time as well. I probably don't do it really well all the time, but talking about the affirming other people, affirming things, that is something that I have learned to do, to accept a compliment a lot of the time, especially in person.
That's amazing.
Just to say thank you to the person basically who gives some sort of compliment, and leave it at that, because I think why I probably had such a hard time with it in the past is because, for a twofold reason. On one hand, I didn't expect it, and probably also maybe wondering, or are they being honest? Or then also looking at myself and thinking about whatever the compliment was about, thinking, is that even true? Like, I'm not sure if I agree that I did that well or whatever. But yeah, learning to just say thank you to someone giving a compliment. I think that's learning grace. Like in the Christian tradition, we tend to think of grace as some sort of forgiveness kind of aspect to it, which I'm not denying that there's grace and forgiveness, but there's a very narrow view, which it took me a long time to get to the point where I understood that grace is sometimes accepting something where there's, but again, there's this picture, a narrow view of grace, where the grace is giving of something. As you might hear a lot of people define it within the church, or the church circles that I'm used to, is defining it as giving something undeserved. But there's the flip side of it, where there is grace in acceptance of things. And let's say it's a compliment. Well, is it deserved or not? I don't know. It's like, again, instead of worrying about whether did I deserve that compliment, just say thanks for the giving of it and just receive it.
Well, yeah, but there's a deeper element, right? Like, obviously there's the formal resolving of it, right? But it's like, well, do you accept this other person's authority to make this statement about you? And do you accept that statement as true and maybe your experience as false, right? Because that's an option. You can just say, well, okay, if they see it that way, right? And I believe they're honorable people, then it is that way. And what I'm seeing isn't true. And that's real hard, right? Because now you're in this conflict, right? Like, oh, right, my judgment is maybe too harsh or something, right?
Right. And I think there's also something in there about learning your identity, maybe, in that you can, how do I say this? There's ego involved in it, but it's maybe more of a perfecting of the ego, if you'd allow that. If I don't know what you think about that, but sort of perfecting of the ego, in that you kind of, with grace, learn how other people see you. So it's maybe when I say the perfecting of the ego, it's maybe more of this lining up better how you see yourself with that reflection back from other people, kind of like what you're saying, accepting what other people say and respecting in the sense that they're being honest and they're telling you what they see.
What is real, right? Like we go back to the fittedness to reality, right? Like maybe they see something fits, right, that you don't see fit or don't fully appreciate as fitting, right? And yeah, I've been thinking a whole lot about attuning the way that I judge things, right? There was this piece in the Bible where it was basically talking about the inner clothing, right? Like the spiritual clothing that we wear, right? Of forgiveness. I don't know, there was like 5 things or whatever, right? Like it was forgiveness, and there was acceptance, and all of these things where they shape the way that reality comes to you, and that allows you to judge in a certain way, right? And there's many ways to judge, right? But there's only a few ways to judge where you're elevating the good, right? Like, and so being critical is good insofar as you're able, right? So it's not so much in the rightness, but in the ability to bring that goodness into being, right? And so what am I saying? I'm trying to reshift the focus to the process, right? Like there's something in having right relationship to the process that allows the springing up of the good, right? And then cultivating that relationship to that process is important, and gratitude is one of these aspects, right?
Yeah, as opposed to a relationship with whatever the final result might be of the process.
Right, or your judgment around how you did the process or whatever, right? Like there's a recognition of the limitations, right? And then the potentiality within the limitations, and that's really fuzzy, right? Like you don't know what that is, but that's where you need to get the gains. So yeah, like do you feel like we kind of got a description of where you're at now with your belonging? Maybe you want to go into the existential aspect maybe a little bit more.
I don't know. I'm not sure. So that's something I'm still trying to work on, trying to figure out. And some of what you were just talking about is a lot of it. One of the things I've been interested in looking at lately is looking at Goethe's, I guess you'd call it a scientific method, where it's somewhat different in that it involves an understanding that the individual, the scientist, the person as an observer is a part of the whole thing. And I'm not exactly sure how that connects with what you were saying. There was something in there you were saying that got me thinking about that, reminded me of me looking into that lately, but it's something to do with the knowledge of the participation with the observer and whatever they're studying has something to do more with that connection, I think. And maybe that's more to do, maybe it is more knowingly having that relationship with the process is maybe part of my interest in that different, whether you call it a philosophy of science or whatever, or a different method, I don't know it, but anyway, that knowledge of the participation and the knowledge of knowing that it's more to do about the relationship and the relationship of the process, like you were saying. I'm kind of getting a little jumbled here in my head, because a lot of this stuff to me is so interconnected that it's trying to tease it out and, you know, undo this big knot of stuff is kind of difficult. At least I find it difficult. And that's part of what I've been trying to understand, to get to a point of understanding these things. So hopefully then it's like, okay, this knot has kind of been undone. Maybe now I can look at this, like you said, maybe I can now recognize that it's this relationship with the process, and I can maybe focus more attention on that rather than worrying about all these other things that just bring a depressive state of mind on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I like this idea of a knot, right? Like there's, like I see it more as like some sort of pipes, right? And like the pipes are different dimensions, right? Like, so one is gratitude, and one is, I don't know, like paying attention, and one is like, and they all come together, right? And they do something, right? But what they're doing, it's like a black box, right? Like if you try to look at it too much, you just get completely confused. But the recognition that black box is there, and that there's these pipes coming in, right? And the recognition that these pipes exist allows you to get a participatory sense of it, right? And I think we shouldn't strive to have more than that, right? Because I think if we try to start to paint upon the box and have the schema of how the pipes run, we lose the ability to connect to it, to relate to it properly.
Possibly. I'm not sure.
Is that you being unwilling to give up your quest for the Philosopher's Stone? Is that it?
It could be, yes.
We gotta turn all of this energy into gold. Yeah. So we talked about building a church on the foundation. So you want to get into what you think building a church looks like?
Yeah, give me a little more direction here. I've got I could go like another 15 minutes or so here.
Mm-hmm. Well, so the direction that I want is like, okay, so you have this foundation, right? You have your basic skills, right? And you have your life, right? So there's all this material reality that's in order, right? Like there's no big disaster, right? Maslow's hierarchy is met. and and then, well, there's this extra thing, right? Like this connectedness to heaven, I guess, right? Because that's what the church is, right? Like it's reaching for heaven in some sense, right? And then within that thing that is reaching for heaven, there's the communing that happens inside the church, right?
Mm-hmm. So I can't remember how this was coming up recently. I was talking with someone about the church as a body, and so something what you were saying just there, talking about reaching up towards heaven, made me think of building up the body so that it can support the head, and also from the other way that so if you're talking about the Christian church specifically, Christ is the head, you have this picture of the head directing the body. So the body supports the head gives direction to the body, and there's this sort of back and forth flow, an up and down flow between the head and the body. And it's how you make it healthy. I mean, I tell you very much in the abstract here, because that's what you got me thinking about. But this proper functioning of the body requires that the head and the body are kind of all in sync, or in agreement. Maybe it's a better word for it. The head and body are in agreement. So,
or resonance.
Yeah, resonance is another word. Yeah, that would work.
So how does that look like for you in life?
Meaning my personal experience with being in churches is the kind of
No. In your personal life, right? Your personal church, right? Like your home, right? Like where you belong, right? Like, because I think the church is how belonging manifests in some profound way, right?
So
Being a member of the body is in being a member of the body in the physical church, but also in your internal being, right? Like become putting all of your aspects as members that commune into whatever, right? Like that's how you feel at peace, right? Like that's how you feel as one. And so maybe if we look at like 5 years from now, right? And you've worked on the gratitude and the knot, right? And you've untied it, right? Like what does that look like? Like what does that allow you to do?
I think what that would look like if it worked out in the way that I envision it or hope it will work out is that I think it means being in the world and doing good and knowing that you're doing good and being okay with everything else, whatever may come, whether that is like a throwaway example I gave at the beginning, you know, somebody dies, there's some tragedy that happens, but being all in agreement or in resonance of mind and body and being in the world brings with it a knowing of, I would just say a knowing of, I guess that word belonging, a knowing of belonging in the sense that mind and body are properly resonating with reality, and that there's all sorts of pain, suffering, and death in the world that can maybe be taken in stride. I don't know if I like saying it that way, but it's taken in, and then regardless of how anyone else would see it, as if they see it as some sort of insurmountable pain or suffering, that it is kind of absorbed in as part of reality, that there's not this dissonance or not even a feeling of this dissonance, that that whatever pain or suffering is there is absorbed in such a way as to be accepted. I'm struggling for words here and what exactly I'm trying to get out, but I think it looks something like a sort of peace or calm. If there's maybe people you've known, or I don't know if you have, but does seem to be people that just go and do and live, and they live good lives, and they're able to weather whatever storm comes their way. And I think that's partly because of their rootedness, and that they know where they are and know they belong in life. They know that there is a reason that they exist. They may not know exactly what the reason is necessarily, but there is a a sense, I think, that they sort of exude or radiate, that they have this peace about them because of their acceptance of life itself.
Mm-hmm. So you used a lot of words that require judgment, right? Like doing good, right? Like, and so when other people say you do good, you have resistance, right? Like you have difficulty in the gratitude, right? So in your own appreciation of good, there's frustration. So how does this authority of good manifest to you when you've built your church?
How does the authority of good manifest itself? I'm not sure if I understand.
Well, in order to accept that you're doing good, right, you need to believe it, right? And you need to believe it based on a standard, right? On an authority, like, oh, like what I'm doing is good, right? Because if you start doubting that you're doing good, you'll get dissonance, right? And so I'm trying to invite you to look at like how do you have right relationship there?
I'm not sure. It sounds like you've got some thoughts on it. I'm not.
I have thoughts about it, but well,
tell me what you're thinking.
Well, like first of all, right? You need to see the form of the good, right? Like because you need to have a conception of what that is. Because if you don't have a conception, how are you ever going to judge, right? And then the second part is you need to believe in that conception, right? Because if you have the conception and you're not convicted of its true nature, then you're never going to be able to manifest it, right? So that's two aspects that need to be there, right? In order for the head to fulfill the role for the body, right? Like, and yeah, so that's kind of the end point that I envision, right? And then the question is, well, like, how do you get there, right? And how do you submit to that, right? Because that's in some sense belief, right? Submittance to, or surrendering at first, right? Because you got to give authority over to that as well.
I'll have to go back and re-listen to what you said at some point. see if it sinks in for me.
But yeah, like you definitely should re-listen to that. But do you get the problem, right? Like the fact that the head.
You talk about how knowing the good, more or less. Is that the issue you're trying to drive at?
Yes, right. Like there's the knowing the good, but also having, how does the good flow from knowing into your action, right? Like how, what's this emanation, and how do you relate to it? That's kind of the question.
I say, yeah. How does it manifest? Well, I guess I would say, to me, what it sounds like is you're getting at acting out the good. At least that's what I hear. Maybe that's why I was kind of confused about your initial question, because I think that's how you how do you manifest the good? Well, you act it out in the world. You do it. So that, I guess, is maybe kind of the connected when I was trying to say doing. Like, I think that's more or less the role of the body, actually the physical, your body, your physical body, my physical body, that it exists for that reason of being able to manifest the good.
Mm-hmm. So how do you believe that, right? Like how do you act that out in faith?
Acting it out in faith, it can mean many different things. It depends on the circumstance. How do you do it in faith?
Well, I think faith is
Yeah.
the state of acting out, right? Like,
Yeah.
so the way that I look at faith nowadays is you have to believe, right? Which is like the structure, that the ideal, right? And then the faith is you trying to embody that, right? You being the vessel, right? Like the pipe that you were talking about, right? Like that allows you to maintain that shape to channel that spirit.
Right. Well, yeah, and so it's beyond belief, because you, if you're acting in faith, you obviously already believe that's something. So the faith is almost more the acting it out itself than it is some sort of in the head belief, in that it's just there in the head. As like faith is maybe like what you're asking about, like how does the good manifest itself? Maybe it comes through faith itself. That maybe what was I going to say? No, I'm agreeing with you. I'm trying to
Okay, how do you clean the pipe?
How do you clean the how do you how do you clean the pipe? You ram a pipe cleaner down. You ram out all the other crap in there. That's how you clean out a pipe.
Yeah, exactly. You got to figure out what the crap is and what the tool of the pipe cleaner looks like, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's for the Christian. That's what the Holy Spirit is. And you say, or the Spirit of Christ coming in and knocking out all the shit, so that you can actually act faithfully. Then.
Yeah, I feel like I'm preaching a little bit too much on the boundaries here. Like there's too much resistance in the pipe cleaning.
Yeah, well, there. I've heard that saying, like having your pipes cleaned out in a like a sexual innuendo sense too. So that's partly why.
Oh yeah.
It's extra funny too. So
yeah. We need to bring in the lube. So how do we apply lube?
No dry entries.
Exactly.
All right, I got to stop. All right.
Okay. Yeah, no, like I do want to have a couple final words about, like, okay, so like you have all that done. So what does that look like?
What does what look like? Acting in faith?
Yeah, like what are you doing? Like just during a day, like how's it different?
Oh, how do I personally in my daily life try to act in faith? I think so. In light of what we were just talking about, using the language about head body, it is trying to bring the body up to do the things that the head has decided upon as the good. I think that's how I think of it and try to do it. So some days far more successful than others, but when it is done successfully, I think that's more or less what that looks like, is acting out with the body what I believe is the right or the good, and doing it consistently throughout the day. And then, like, there was an example of something the other day happened that I got really upset about. Trying to my phone's about to die. I've got a few percent left here. Go a couple more minutes here to try and wrap up with you. But I got really upset because there's some call I got from somebody over in India, and I kind of, maybe I should try and wrap this up quick here, because my phone just went dark, like it's about to shut off. So I don't want it to just end right in the middle of things here, in the middle of a sentence. But
well, we can fix that like later. That's fine.
Okay. All right. But anyway, I get this phone call from somebody who's obviously over in India. I can't hardly understand them. They're asking questions about how I'm going to vote for the upcoming election in a couple of weeks. And I was just, I don't know. I was really a jerk to them. And my wife called me out on it. She's like, "Yeah, you were really rude." And I was like, oh, what I wanted to do was defend myself and say, yeah, well, no, I wanted to justify it, basically, how I acted. And then that all actually made me even more upset in the end, that I, instead of just immediately saying, yeah, you're right. But then I was almost more mad that I tried to justify it in the end afterwards. And when I say the body, it's not necessarily always, like the beneath the head, neck down. It's all the physicality of the body, that whether it's the tongue or the eyes or whatever. And so in that example, there was such a felt failure at it then, that I actually even then had that dissonance to where then I failed to actually, bring up the body to act what I think is the good for like a day or two after that, even. So such a personal disappointment, I guess. So anyway, there is that need, I guess, to sort of, again, to go back to earlier, sort of a feedback loop. There is the knowing you've acted out the good actually almost feeds doing more good. Or like we talked about gratitude, like actually cultivating the gratitude ends up, I think, leading to more gratitude if you're able to do it.
Mm-hmm. So sounds like there's a reverberation of the event, and that has to be resolved through gratitude, or not gratitude, but forgiveness, actually, right? Like that.
Right. Yeah, humility was an aspect that had to come in there too, at least in that
Right.
particular. But oftentimes, humility is a requirement or a prerequisite.
We had a somewhat abrupt stop because Josh's battery ran out. But everybody, please leave your comments, and yeah, I'll see you guys on the next episode of Unfolding the Soul. Bye.